Welcome to Real Body Talk. I am your host, Jennifer Krayat-Solis. Today's show shines a light on a very important and under-discussed topic, body image in boys and men. I'm happy to welcome my guest, an expert in this area, Brian Pollock, owner and clinical director of Hilltop Behavioral Health in Summit, New Jersey. Welcome, Brian. It is so wonderful to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I am actually really impressed with all the work you're doing here. It's kind of fun.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. I'm glad we could collaborate and do this show together.
No, thanks.
So typically when we think about body image, and usually we talk about that in terms of negative body image, we talk about it in the context of girls and women. But that's not the full story.
It's not.
Right?
Yeah. One of the big parts of the eating disorder, and even just men, boys, issues around masculinity that we're starting to see more and more is that our young men, our boys, and even our adult men are having to live up to standards nowadays that possibly are overemphasized, that are creating a real question of self, a avoidance of vulnerability, and also the disallowance of actual connection, partly because of what's called masculinity norms.
Okay.
But we can also state that the current status of the way people relate growing up is a bit hindered in the relational aspects of give and take. So it's really tough for our young men to figure out what they need to do and how to become a person that they hope to become in the long run.
You use the phrase masculinity standards.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Sure. You know, there's a belief nowadays that's permeating in society, and you can see it in many different examples, and I'll outline a couple along the way. The first thing is that our boys are kind of being acculturated to be always strong, to have a sense of control, to not allow creativity, to always be successful, to be smart, to be leaders, to constantly be able to be in charge. And as anyone who's gone through life can understand, that's impossible to keep up all the time. So there's an element here where we are really trying to empower children as they're getting older about making good choices and being resilient and strong. But unfortunately, the influences, besides the parental influences that we're seeing, are really making a mark on how our kids are taking in and what we'd call introjecting, or just understanding for themselves what they're experiencing. We can kind of call it a masculine mystique, what I just outlined. But you know, you can see it in many avenues, even to the point of toys. You know, if you, and I can't show it here, but if you were to take an old Star Wars toy from 1970, so on, right? And you look at Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, and then you look at a toy from the newer versions in the 2000s, you can notice a vast difference in the way that the body looks. There's muscles, there's definition, there's a bit more of an impression of strength, right? And this is affecting our boys because when it comes down to being able to understand how to connect, how to share, how to be vulnerable, to understand that weakness is a place that you can learn from, we're not allowing that. The other places that we're seeing this, of course, is in things like GQ, Men's Health, all these magazines, which also goes into this idea of body image and the need for muscularity and the desire of it. You know, when you look at all these magazines, you can really see that there's this perfect ideal that's being put out there. And we're seeing it rampant in the community, where people, young men, are coming in and they're not saying they want to lose weight, right? They're not saying, I'm fearful of being fat, although that does happen. What they're actually saying is, I want to be lean, and I want to be fit, and I want to be strong. They don't want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was Mr. Universe. They want to be on the cover of Men's Health magazine. And it's really starting to take a toll.
It's interesting, like I think this is where the narratives differ between men and women in general, right? We're talking in general terms.
Very much so.
Right, very general.
Very much
This is the, I want to lose weight, I'm afraid of gaining weight versus, right?
Yeah.
I want to be fit, I want to be, what did you say, muscularly toned or...
Yeah, exactly. I want to have that perception of I have it
strength.
all together and strong,
Right.
right? I'm capable and
Yes.
all of that.
Right.
And
Right.
I just don't think that's possible 24/7.
Well, it's just interesting to me how these values of strength and having it all together and being capable, that gets mapped on to the physical body, right?
Yes.
Like, it's like our physical appearance needs to precede us. So that when I see you, I see capability and strength and these qualities that you're talking about, and according to this masculine standard.
Yes. And is that a sense of control? Is that because in order to feel secure in our world, we need to find a way to objectify ourselves in a safe way, not in a negative way? I think the fear of objectification and judgment in our standard day-to-day lives causes us to want to feel safe. And so if we can't control our outside world, well, there's only one thing we can control, and that's ourselves. And that really does take a toll. It gets passed down, too, along the way. And as I do this work, you know, there's, of course, the focus on females, and very much needed and is happening. And if you were to take the idea of embodiment and you look at what is it to have a mind-body connection, and you were to go up to a young girl and say, hey, or even an adolescent or an adult and say, when's the last time you really felt free in your body,
Yeah.
right? And if you really got to the nitty-gritty, they would probably say between 6 and 10 on average. They were able to play sports, they were able to run around, no worries, body hasn't changed yet. There's just this carefree freedom of being able and capable. And I think that, at the end of the day, is what we're searching for when we live our lives. How can I be free? And boys, it's different, and we're still trying to figure this out. It's a pretty obvious thing for girls, and I don't mean to sound too general, but puberty time is often when there's this change for girls, because societally and socially, you know, things change. And
it's visible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence the objectification, the need to fit in, and hopefully as they go through that, they have really wonderful, strong supports that invigorate and empower that girl, right? And, you know, that's beyond important. But there's also, for boys, it's a little bit easier because they don't go through that visceral change at that age. But something goes awry. And is it happening beforehand as they're starting to play sports at 6, 7, and 8 in our current culture, where if you start sports at 6, you're supposed to be a professional player by the time you're 18?
Traveling everywhere. And
yeah, it's a crazy schedule of pressure, and we're losing that fun. And then at the same time, is it also then happening later on? Because that's when you can actually start working out medically, is, you know, when you're around 14, 15 with enough measures of safety, not overdoing it. And where are these messages coming from, and why this push to feel this way? Why this push to almost compensate and forego things that possibly are creative, things that are expressive, right? Things that help you move in your body, freedom, that idea of just being capable without having to physically be capable. You know, and I think there's a lot to learn there.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned objectification, and I can't help but, you know, wonder how social media has upped the ante, right? I mean, you mentioned the magazines, right? But social media, I mean, these are the images that are in front of us every day, right?
Very much so.
What are you seeing in terms of that influence?
You know, I'd love to call it a nightmare. But it's also this thing, it's kind of, we have no choice.
Yeah,
we
it's
have
necessary,
to.
right?
What do we do?
This is how we're functioning as a
Yes.
world.
Yes.
Globally.
And so we do need to find a way as adults and even as adolescents and even young preteens to understand the influence of social media and have some kind of preventative programming either in the school systems and things like that to be able to understand how to approach this stuff and almost like dissect it and digest it, because I think that we're at this place where it's never good enough. Also, our kids are, even though they're kids, they're getting ads on Facebook for working out. They're getting ads from other major, let's say, TV, stations and things like that, advertising what a body should look like in the teen years. I have a little one who one day put on a certain channel, and there was a bunch of teenagers being teenagers, and they, for teenagers, looked like they had perfect bodies. And that's quite an influence as you're growing up to watch that. And that worries me. And that's not just for girls, very much for boys.
Absolutely.
And we're missing that.
Yeah.
Where it's almost okay for boys to be pushed to be strong. And I don't know if that's always been the case, but one of the things also I've always said to people is if you were alive, and I wasn't, when Barbie came around, right? And we were fully aware of what the Barbie type of influence was going to do to our young girls at that time. We now can watch what's happening to our young boys right now. So the boys are being influenced for the first time in the past, let's say 5 to 10 years, and we're starting to slowly see a little bit of that experience. But the pressure and how it's changing our young men is beyond anything that's ever happened before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. As you're talking, I'm thinking about some of the boys that are in my family, younger boys, and, video games is their world.
Yeah.
And when we go to visit, and I'm thinking now in my mind of who's on the screen of these video games, and they are these large, fit, military
Yes.
type figures,
Yep.
typically.
And
Right.
they're fighting,
And
they're
they're
violent.
violent, and they're,
Yeah. And one thinks, and I'm not here to attack video games.
Sure.
One thinks that a lot of times that ideal is what people are soaking in, or young men, and they might be. There's also an element here for boys that, they are a little bit more aggressive, not all, but, boys can sometimes have a bit more energy. Biologically, as they're
Sure,
growing up,
sure.
that can be a little more intense.
Right.
Girls too, it depends on
Sure.
the nature of the person. So they're really going for a norm here, a stereotypical norm that excites and engages these kids, right? I don't know fully if the military type of thing influences them. I don't have that research, and I don't know.
Yeah.
What I do know, though, is these expectations for muscularity are starting to create dysfunction in our boys in ways that are around control.
Please continue with this. This
yeah.
seems really important.
So when it comes to the idea of let's talk about two things, the fear of femininity. Our boys, and even our culture, but more our boys, are fearful of what a feminine quality could be. What would it be like to be emotional as a 15-year-old boy and be okay with that, right? What would it be to express oneself and feel as though even if you're, crying, that you won't be judged? What would it be to be artistic, and would that be okay? And sometimes I think for the artistic boys, good for you. Not a lot of people really that are boys really can connect with that often, and that fear of femininity, of expression, sharing, respect, offering support, empowering other people is super important. Being grateful, having humility, being able to say I'm sorry or I'm learning. That's not okay for boys.
Wow.
It's really not. And then there's another aspect which fuels that as well, which is the need for success, power, and control. And the need for those three things particularly are part of that shape for what we're seeing physically as it manifests. And so if you have that perfect mixture, and then also the last one, which is you have that fear of femininity, you have the success, power, and control, and then there's the emotional rigidity, or the lack thereof. perfect mixture, all three. And I know they kind of sound similar, but that's because they're making a perfect picture of what we're so accustomed to.
Right.
It just sounds like the same thing, but they're actually three different things.
Wow.
And then, in my arena of what I'm doing, I'm seeing it in my office. I think because I'm a guy who works with, mental health needs around anxiety, food, body, trauma, and I'm getting a lot of young boys coming in and males, and these are core to their existence. We start seeing obsessive compulsiveness around this, body checking, mirror checking when it comes back down to the body having to go and look a certain way. The need to create for oneself perfect symmetry. So I might have someone who walks into the office and we talk about how they're comparing their muscles in the mirror. Think about like the guys in the gym when they're looking,
Yes.
right?
Wow.
That's sometimes very much muscle dysmorphia. It's the need for perfect symmetry and to always feel strong in their bodies to feel like they are in control of them.
Wow.
And it comes about with restriction. It utilizes food. So it gets 10% of people who struggle with this even use steroids and human growth hormones, creatine. Particularly in the teenage years, creatine seems to be the big acceptable thing for growing muscles and being a strong man. I cannot tell you the amount of growing 16-year-olds using creatine and loading in proteins in order to make sure that their musculature gets full of muscles.
Wow.
So it's really, really rampant. Bulimia, people won't even recognize it because they think that because someone's loading up on proteins and then working out for an hour and a half to 2 hours a day excessively and obsessively, people think, oh, that's just a guy being a guy. No, that's actually dysfunctional. That guy isn't able then, my guess is, how are they connecting with people? How much are they able to be at home with their family? How much are their extracurricular activities being impacted by this?
Right.
Because it's to the point where they're possibly doing it 5, 6, 7 times a week. So it adds up. We also see that men can restrict to a point where they want to get what you would call cut, where they know if they've done this research online, of course, and they find out, well, if you don't have a certain amount of, let's say, water, and you avoid the carbs, gluten-free, something like that, for X amount of time, you may actually show more definition
Wow.
in your muscles.
Wow.
All of these control mechanisms are signs that something mental health-wise is a little off
Yeah.
and needs help.
Wow. It's really serious.
Very much so. Very much so. And so when you look at this, it's like, well, what do I do? How do I prevent this, right? Because, look, I got a little guy.
I get it.
So how do you do it?
Right.
And there's an element where it's tough. You try to find a way to understand what it is to have a body and be in a body. And it's not easy. Really not. So how do you define for kids the word fat? Because that's a scary word and it goes around the playground like crazy, right? How do you define words like health at every size, right? How do you define giving and taking? How do you define learning for our kids? And then how do you not react in such a harsh way when they use these words that they learn that these words have power? Because when they learn these words have power, they use them. And so there's a funny, like almost anti-reaction we have to figure out here. And that's part of the process when parents come into my office, and I'm sure when people ask you questions and work with you and all of our colleagues, is how do we make sense of all of this? And how do we help our kids remain in a way where we know they're going to be their best selves without hurting themselves? Yeah.
Wow. You're really enlightening me, and I'm sure everyone who's watching. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
let's stay with this idea of parenting.
Okay.
We're both parents, right?
Yep.
So I know we both have a invested interest here, but how do we raise our boys to feel empowered and have permission to be vulnerable and creative and strong? Maybe redefining that word strength, right?
Yeah.
But how do we support our children in this process? What are some tips that you can offer parents watching?
You know, it's super tough. I am not perfect at this. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect parent. I'm sure you
I understand.
you know,
I get it.
You know, before coming here today, we had breakfast and running around and dressing them, and the whole thing,
I know.
right?
You feel like you've lived 2 days already.
Yep.
I had a hectic morning too.
Yeah. And
I
so
get it.
in that hustle and bustle, you know, where's the downtime
Right.
and where's the sharing time and the learning
Yes.
time?
Yes.
And I do believe, and this is something we too struggle with, technology has to find a way to be lessened. I think we all fall in the trap.
Yeah.
And also, I don't want to go the technology route because then I'll look like I'm blaming, but more how do we find ways to be with them in their vested interests? So being able to share with them, being able to stop everything you're doing, right? All this mindful parenting, being there, because what they found is that neuropsychology and even through your own, they call mirror neurons, you actually, when you're sitting with someone like you and I are talking, you're actually connecting in a way that helps the brain start to build new pathways towards connection. And that's what relationships are all about. So getting on their level. And then when they say these words, being able to be and explore, well, what do we really mean by that? These kids, we think when they're 6, 7, 8, they say a word, they know what it means. They have no clue. They're just testing it. Being outside in the dead cold of winter, you know, go outside, get outside.
Right.
Activities, right? It's
Yeah.
exhausting being a parent.
Use your body, enjoy it,
Exactly.
and then
Be free, go play, go, you know, my little girl loves playing football with my boy, you know, and my little boy fights with creativity, but we get him there. You know, it's these things, reading every night, being there, creating that space, that freedom, letting them be running around outside. How many neighborhoods nowadays do we go outside and there's nobody out there? It's so odd. So these kinds of things, and then when it comes to food, the number one thing you can do is have dinner every night or every possible night at the table, no music. Well, music is fine. No TV, no technology, sitting there eating together.
Yes.
There's so much research on this. It is the number one thing you can do. And then making sure, of course, that they're having their meals. And if that is a problem, then you try to figure it out along the way. But food, mind, and body equals embodiment. It equals a sense of connection, and it has to take place at home at all times.
I absolutely love that. Thank you. Yeah. And then, just briefly, what can you offer, perhaps the men who are watching? And there's some light bulbs going off for them.
Yeah.
And what can you say to those people?
I would say reach out, you know. The National Eating Disorders Association and the National Association for Males with Eating Disorders has joined forces and all under the branch of the Eating Disorder Association, NEDA.
Yes.
So I would reach out there.
Wonderful.
I would look online. There are plenty of resources. There's wonderful, wonderful people out there that are really talking about males and what's happening. You can find all kinds of books. There's all kinds of outlets. But more importantly than anything else is start something for yourself. I think often what we struggle with is this idea of there's nothing for me to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know if I can find a place that will accept me. So then create it. Create it. Find a place or create a place where you can, I don't know, use Meetup or something like a Facebook group where you connect. There's a lot of people on Facebook that have these needs. Type in males get eating disorders too. which is a European-based organization. You can look at my own, you can reach out to me at hilltopbehavioralhealth.com.
Yes.
You can just read about health at every size. There's a lot of work out there starting to push this fold a little bit. But more importantly than any of that, it's go be part of your community, be in your body. Find what makes you happy that's not about exercise, that's not about weight loss, that's not about control, that's about giving. So could that be volunteering? Could that be being with 5-year-olds as they're in their after-school program? Could that be learning about something new? You know, but what is it to live in your body? You know, dance. Call me crazy, dance, right?
Yeah.
Anything that helps just express something other than calories, food, muscle, body, clothes, shopping.
Yeah.
Get out of there.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Brian, thank you for all that you're doing in this area.
Oh, thank you.
For all the people that, you know, you're supporting, and just the really fantastic information that you provided today.
Oh, thanks.
And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can go to hilltopbehavioralhealth.com. I am there on the internet. You will see there that there's a bunch of us, and we offer men's groups. We actually are just starting one with one of our psychologists,
I saw that.
and we're excited
Yeah,
about
looks
that.
great.
It's like the
Really
first one in
important.
New Jersey.
Really important.
So thanks, and we're doing all kinds of fun stuff. We might be having you join us
Yes.
for a yoga embodiment group for
Yes,
females.
yes.
And you know, I often will present places. I'm happy to go places and present and talk
Wonderful.
about this stuff. So
Wonderful.
thanks for inviting
Well,
me.
I can't thank you enough. And thank you to everybody who watched today. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with a friend. And you can watch us again on MLTV. I will see you soon. Thank you.